Welcome to the newest episode of midweek edition of Beatin' and Bangin'. I'm your host, Kyle Dalton. We've got some interesting stories to talk about in today's episode, including one on Hailie Deegan's former crew chief talking about the driver and what he had to say about her situation leaving AM Racing. Another story on one spotter's remarks on Kyle Larson's driving in Chicago and what the Hendrick Motorsports driver had to say about it. And our final story is on Kevin Harvick's harsh comments on electric racing. The Fox announcer didn't hold back. And finally, we have our By the Numbers segment this week, and we're taking a look at a couple of things, including our weekly last 5 race analysis and a really intriguing look at all Cup drivers and the last time since they won a race. This year has been a wild year when it comes to drivers ending long winless streaks, including Alex Bowman continuing the trend by going to victory lane this past weekend in Chicago. However, before we get to all those stats, let's go back to the news on Monday when Hailie Deegan and AM Racing announced that the two had agreed to part ways. The 22-year-old driver shared her message on social media and said that things hadn't turned out the way she expected, and there are always several reasons why a race team does or doesn't work, and their goals no longer align. She concluded by thanking her fans and saying only she knows the whole story and what she needs to succeed. Unsurprisingly, many fans of the Truck Series' 3-time most popular driver offered their support on social media. On Facebook, there was one particular response of note, and it came from Deegan's former crew chief, Joe Williams, who was relieved of his duties by AM Racing in late May. "You did a great job there with all the changes going on," Williams said. "Keep your head up. A better opportunity awaits." That comment by Williams would indicate that there wasn't an issue between him and the driver when he was let go, as some suggested when it happened. Interestingly, that wasn't all Williams had to say. He responded to another fan's remarks who said that after Deegan's announcement, the fired crew chief should get his job back. To that, Williams replied, "I don't need my job back. A lot more than driver, crew chief. Wasn't her fault they made the change. Like the post said, goals don't align." Williams suggesting that it wasn't her fault is a curious comment and would seem to indicate that her departure was all initiated by the team. What those goals not aligning aren't exactly clear, but one proposed theory that makes sense is her goal is to get paid to race. Their goal is to get paid for her to race. We may never know the full details, but it won't be for a lack of trying. I've got several feelers out and will let you know if I find out anything. Moving on to our next story and moving up to the Cup Series. It came yesterday when Kyle Larson responded to a post on X by Brad Keselowski's spotter, TJ Majors. Majors is also a co-host on the Door Bumper Clear podcast and had this to say about Larson's Xfinity Series race in Chicago.
He was making him overdrive the corners on purpose. Larson obviously is no lack of talent. You watch SVG's in-car, and he's missing like every single corner. You know, Shane's back there probably just smiling a little, waiting, you know what I mean? But really fun to watch.
Majors saying that Larson missed every single corner caught the attention of the 2021 champion, who responded, "That cool shirt must have froze some of your brain cells, TJ Majors," Larson wrote. Larson was referring to Majors wearing a cool shirt the week before at Nashville. I know HMS drivers can be portrayed as boring and quiet, but Larson does show his personality on occasion like he did here, and with the whole Christopher Bell's remarks on Chase Elliott, Chase Briscoe scenario a few weeks ago in New Hampshire. Moving on to our final story for the day, and it comes from Kevin Harvick's Happy Hour podcast yesterday, when the 2014 champion was talking about the electric vehicle that was displayed this past weekend in Chicago. Here's what he had to say.
But
says
I can tell you
prototype.
this, there is no future for NASCAR electric vehicle racing. If it does not make noise and smell like it's burning gas, there is no freaking way.
No freaking way, huh? While I respect Harvick's opinion, I think he's wrong, especially when he makes a complete blanket statement like that. I think he's wrong for 2 reasons. First, he's excluding the idea of a separate additional series, not one that is replacing any of the current ones, which I think is very possible. But second, and most importantly, he makes all of these statements like EVs are going away. Yes, there's no denying there's been a slowing in sales, as he mentioned, and manufacturers are repositioning their cars. But the automotive experts certainly aren't suggesting that EVs are going away altogether. I look at it this way. If you had told me 30 years ago that I would have access to pretty much everything I needed as far as information is concerned on my phone, I would have told you you're crazy. Translation: technology has developed at an incredibly rapid pace over that time. Why can't the same be true for these cars? I would just caution anyone who thinks that EVs are going away. It's just not going to happen. And this week's report from the International Energy Agency that said EV sales globally are expected to rise to 16.6 million vehicles this year from 13.7 million in 2023 confirms that. Speaking of numbers, it's time to transition to our By the Numbers segment this week. And the first thing we're going to take a look at is our last 5 race analysis. First, let's take a look at last week's numbers, and you can see Tyler Reddick held the top spot and was followed by Chris Buescher, Chase Elliott, Kyle Larson, and Christopher Bell in the top 5. As I noted last week, Todd Gilliland and Carson Hocevar made appearances inside the top 10. Take a look at this week's numbers, and the 2311 Racing Pilot is once again holding down the number 1 position, but the top 10 has seen quite a bit of change, including multiple drivers not from the big teams inside of it for the first time. Look who's in the number 4 spot. Todd Gilliland has had a solid last 5 races, including his 7th place result in the Windy City. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. is inside the top 10 for the first time, with a 5-race stretch that includes 3 top 10s at Iowa, New Hampshire, and Chicago. And check out Daniel Suarez. Outside of the win earlier this year at Atlanta, the number 99 pilot has always been considered second best to Ross Chastain. Not in these last 5, as you can see, with Suarez coming in with an average finishing position of 15.4 and his Trackhouse teammate 2 spots lower at 16.2. Sandwiched in between is Michael McDowell at 16 even, and he's had an up and down 5 races with 2 good races at Sonoma and Chicago, bookending a couple of lackluster runs at Iowa and Nashville. Outside of the top 10, I think the other ones that are interesting include Kyle Busch, who moved up from being second to last in last week's poll to 23.6 in this week's numbers, and Denny Hamlin, who has an average finishing position of 25.6 and has had an abysmal 5 races by his standards, including his 30th place finish at Chicago. Our next and final set of numbers was inspired after what I saw this weekend in Chicago when Alex Bowman ended his 80-race winless streak. I was thinking how multiple other drivers have snapped long winless streaks this year, including Bowman's teammate, Chase Elliott. So I called on my buddy Joel Steuben to put together a graphic, and he came up with this beauty. Check it out. You can see in 2024, Brad Keselowski has ended the longest winless streak so far at 110 races, followed by his former Penske teammate Austin Cindric, who snapped his streak at 85 with his win at St. Louis. Then we have Bowman, Suarez, Logano, and Elliott. Now, let's take a look at the other drivers who have wins but are still currently on winless streaks. And Justin Haley is at the top, 129 races since his surprise win at Daytona in 2019. And he's followed by Chase Briscoe, Austin Dillon, Bubba Wallace, and you see the rest, including Busch, at 41. Joel went above and beyond, included the other regular Cup Series drivers who haven't won it all, and Corey LaJoie takes the cake by a lot at 256 races, with Ryan Preece coming in at second. Todd Gilliland is in third, but based on his last 5 races performance, he might be closer to victory lane than we thought. All right, guys, that's a wrap on this episode. I want to know what you think. Let's start with these numbers. Any surprises in there? Especially our last 5 races analysis. As for our stories, what did you think about Kevin Harvick's remarks on EVs? Agree or disagree that there's no way EVs are part of NASCAR at some point in the future? And I'm going to get even more specific and say in the next 25 years. And what did you think about Hailie Deegan's former crew chief's remarks about the driver leaving AM Racing? Where do you think she lands? Remember, if you want to check out my written work, you can find it at heavy.com. Also, make sure to check out my Beating and Banging podcast on the Blue Wire Network. Thanks as always for supporting the channel, and have a great rest of your day.